How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, what if P. Diddy goes to Fort Dix? Safety and celebrity status behind bars. So I've done shows before on what happens when celebrities get locked into the prison system, the pressure it puts on the facility itself, the pressure it puts on staff. I even posted a video on my community board a while ago about maybe managing him a little bit more at the jail level. But then he put a request, or the lawyer put a request for him to go to Fort Dix, specifically for probably the RDAP program. And I did a video on why P. Diddy's lawyers would probably suggest that. Why would that work in P. Diddy's benefit? We even did a calculation of time and how much that could take off his sentence of him actually being inside the prison. But then I got a few more questions that were sent my way. So if he was to go to Fort Dix, what would his life be like? And would that include his life inside the RDAP program? So I did my research. It took a little while to get back on this one. It took a few days. But I got the 10 questions that were sent my way. I'm going to go ahead and read you the questions and give you the answers. So the first question is, how do staff decide where to place a celebrity inmate like P. Diddy inside a low security facility like Fort Dix? Would he likely be in general population or more restricted housing for safety? So Fort Dix is not a high security penitentiary. It's a low security federal facility known for its open dormitory housing and a massive inmate population, nearly 3,900 men in the main compound. So by design, it isn't equipped for long-term isolation of inmates. There are no special single inmate cell blocks aside from the standard special housing unit. That's a SHU, and that's used for short-term segregation or discipline. If Diddy were to land there, the starting point is always general population, just like any other incoming inmate. He would be housed in the regular dorms, multi-person rooms, often 10 to 12 men each, but that's what I got from my online research. If someone works at Fort Dix, tell me if that's correct, but that's what I got during my research. Eating in the chow hall and mingling in the yard with everyone else. There's simply no VIP section in a low security prison. He'll be thrown into the mix by default. Now, here's the issue. Diddy is a unique case. His celebrity profile, wealth, and media visibility poses special challenges for safety and order. The Bureau of Prisons, BOP, might consider isolating him for his own protection, but doing so at Fort Dix would be hard to justify and even harder to maintain. Fort Dix isn't set up for keeping a high-profile inmate in long-term solitary without a very good reason. His attorneys, and likely the courts, would demand concrete evidence of specific threats to warrant removing him from the regular compound. Vague precautionary claims wouldn't fly. In a low security environment, everyone is expected to participate in programs and live communally, and a high profile inmate can't be kept in the SHU for an extended period just due to fame. BOP knows that. Unless there's an actual threat, they'll treat him like any other prisoner to avoid legal and public scrutiny. In fact, programming needs are a big factor here. Combs' legal team specifically requested Fort Dix because it offers RDAP. So that's Residential Drug Abuse Program, one of the few federal programs that can reduce an inmate's sentence by up to a year upon completion. Fort Dix is a flagship RDAP site, and in their letter to the judge, they cited the facility's drug treatment, educational, and family visitation advantages as reasons to send him there. That makes it likely the BOP will honor the recommendation and place him at Fort Dix. And once he's there, he'll be in the RDAP unit participating in treatment like everyone else, not stashed away in protective custody. Remember, RDAP is a residential program. Participants live together in a modified therapeutic community, and to get the benefit, potentially 12 months off his sentence, he has to be in general population engaging with that program, not sitting in isolation. So bottom line for this question, he will almost certainly be housed in the general population. He'll live in a multi-man dorm room, sleep in a bunk bed like everyone else, and follow the same daily schedule. The prison will manage any elevated risk through staff vigilance, for example, quietly keeping an eye on who approaches him rather than through isolating him. Fort Dix structure really doesn't allow much else. Unless a specific threat materializes, he goes in with the herd, period. All right, so question 2. In a dormitory-style setting, How would other inmates view him? As a target, as an asset, or someone to be tested? So inmates might view a high-profile prisoner like Diddy in a few different ways. So I'm going to give you the few ways to look at him, but then I want to kind of focus more on Fort Dix and what my conclusion would be on this. So yes, you could have a target. There will always be a couple of guys who see a famous inmate as an opportunity. So assaulting or extorting a celebrity could bring instant notoriety. In the prison mindset, attacking someone like Diddy might earn you a rep for being the guy who didn't fear a superstar. Then you have an asset. Others will think more strategically and view him as a potential asset. He's a man with deep pockets, influential friends, and knowledge of business and music. So these inmates might try to buddy up to him, hoping for a financial favor or two, like commissary items, etc., or future connections, like a job or contacts when they get out. Having a billionaire in your corner, even informally, is attractive. And then you have a test for status. Some inmates, often younger or with something to prove, might see him as a test. They figure if they can stand up to or mouth off to a celebrity and not back down, they'll earn respect from others. It's a way to make a name. Yeah, I checked Puff Daddy or Puff Diddy or Diddy and didn't flinch. This doesn't necessarily mean violence. It could be challenges like pressuring him to show he's tough or won't snitch if provoked. However, it's important to note the context of Fort Dix. This is still a low security prison where most inmates have a lot to lose by stirring up trouble. It's not a violent max where many inmates are doing life and some of them have zero incentive to behave. At Fort Dix, a large portion of the population is made up of men working towards release dates, often first-time offenders or those convicted of non-violent crimes. The overall level of violence and prison politics at Fort Dix is relatively moderate. Inmate accounts say conflicts tend to be isolated scuffles, often personal beefs or intra-gang issues, rather than a pervasive climate of predation. One inmate even noted that while Fort Dix isn't completely safe, it's not like a USP or medium in terms of danger. In other words, most people aren't looking for trouble if they can avoid it. Because of this dynamic, I'd suspect many prisoners will lean towards treating Diddy as more of an asset or curiosity than as prey. For some, will almost have a mentorship aura. I mean, he's older, he's in his 50s, and widely successful outside. So inmates with entrepreneurial dreams or music aspirations might gravitate to him for advice or just to hear his stories. He might get a lot of respect simply because of who he is and what he's accomplished, which could actually protect him in a sense. Hurting him might anger those inmates who respect or like him. That's not to say there's zero risk of someone testing him. This could be an inmate. There could be an inmate with a chip on his shoulder who tries to make an example of the rich guy, but in a low security setting, any inmate who assaults or extorts him would face swift repercussions. The administration would come down hard, and that inmate could get shipped to a higher security prison or have years added to his sentence. Knowing this, only a true reckless or desperate prisoner would attempt it. Most will likely conclude that it's smarter to befriend the golden goose than cook it. Over time, as the initial buzz of his arrival fades, he'll just become part of the landscape. In the open dorms, you can't hide in a cell. Everyone is in everyone's business to a degree. So eventually people will get used to him being around. And at that point, he'll probably be treated just like another guy doing time. I'll bite one with a famous backstory. Now we have a question about manipulation and influence. What unique challenges do officers face when high-profile inmates try to leverage their money, fame, or connections to manipulate the system? So a celebrity inmate of Diddy's caliber presents a very tricky situation for prison staff. Such an inmate might attempt to manipulate the system subtly rather than through overt rule breaking. And here are some ways that can happen and the challenges for staff. So you got seeking small favors. A high-profile prisoner might start by asking for minor exceptions to the rules, say an unscheduled phone call to his attorney or an extra mattress because his back hurts. These requests can sound reasonable in isolation. If an officer indulges these, the inmate may then push for larger favors over time, having established a precedent. Staff must be alert that today's small favor could be tomorrow's big rule violation if they're not firm. Leveraging personal charm or curiosity. Someone like Diddy is used to networking and reading people. So he might engage staff in friendly conversation, dropping anecdotes about celebrities or offering business advice. An officer might unwittingly start seeing him less as an inmate and more as a person of status, which erodes the professional boundary. This can lead to undue familiarity, where an officer might hesitate to write him up for something they would discipline another inmate for just because they became too friendly. And then you have the implicit use of fame as pressure. The inmate could hint that if he's treated unfairly, the world will hear about it. For example, he could say, I hope I don't have to call my lawyer about how I'm being treated. Officers know that a single complaint from him can blossom into a news story. This can make staff second guess themselves. If I write him up for this, will I be painted as the bad guy in the press? That psychological pressure is a form of influence. That psychological pressure is a form of influence unique to high-profile inmates. Fort Dix staff are aware of these manipulation risks, and the prison will take steps to mitigate them. Staff assignment strategies can play a big role in limiting an inmate's ability to game the system. So I looked this up for Fort Dix. They do have some bidded posts. At least that's what's showcasing. If I'm wrong, please let me know. So there are permanent housing unit officers. Many housing units at Fort Dix are covered by bid posts, permanent assignments that experienced officers have bid on by seniority. This means the same officers will supervise Diddy's dorm days in and day out. Sorry, let's read that again. This means the same officers will supervise Diddy's dorm day in and day out. The advantage here is consistency. Those officers will get to know his patterns and can maintain a firm, uniform routine. A high-profile inmate can sometimes shop around for lenient staff if new faces rotate constantly, but with steady officers, there's no choice to play one against another. And that's what I was told, that the unit officers are bidded posts. Now, guys, if you work at Fort Dix, let me know if that's correct. But that's what I was told, and that's what I saw. But there are some rotating posts. So other duties like corridor escorts, recreational yard officers, or work detail supervisors are typically rotated among staff on a schedule. This ensures no single officer is always in a position to grant him favors during movements or activities. For example, if he's being escorted to an outside medical appointment, it won't always be the same officer he could try to buddy up to. They rotate that duty, and rotation makes it harder for him to develop relationships that he could exploit. And then sensitive posts like SHU and security details. In areas like the SHU, which is solitary, or any special security detail, the BOP mandates rotation. That's what I saw. You tell me if that's correct. No officer stays permanently in a post where they could potentially control an inmate's privileges or punishment long term. This is a safeguard so that no one gets so comfortable that they start bending rules for certain inmates. If, say, Diddy were ever placed in SHU for any reason, the staff handling him would change regularly, preventing him from forming a bond and possibly getting contraband or favors. The key for the officers is to set the tone early and keep a professional distance. From day one, they'll need to enforce the rules with him exactly as they would with any inmate. It's likely that the unit manager or a senior officer will even have a direct talk with Combs when he arrives to clarify expectations. Essentially, you're Mr. Combs on the street, but in here, you're just another inmate. Here's what's allowed and what isn't. By making boundaries crystal clear up front, they deny him the ambiguity that often allows manipulation to creep in. It's also crucial that staff presents a united front. If 9 officers are strict and one is soft, guess which one the savvy inmate will target? All it takes is one weak link. For example, if one officer quietly lets him stay out after lights out to make a phone call, word will spread. Then he might even brag or boost of his influence. And suddenly that officer's authority is undermined. Consistency among staff denies the inmate any cracks to slip through. And one more point, money and bribery. A wealthy inmate might eventually attempt to corrupt staff outright. It's rare, but it happens. Fort Dix, unfortunately, has seen staff compromised before. In 2019, a correctional officer at the facility pleaded guilty to accepting bribes to smuggling contraband. Contraband phones and drugs are a known problem at Fort Dix, with even drones used in smuggling schemes. When someone like Diddy, who has significant financial resources, the temptation for a dishonest officer could be extreme. He could potentially offer sums that far exceed a guard's monthly salary or a correctional officer's monthly salary in exchange for a cell phone or special treatment. The administration is undoubtedly aware of that risk. Expect them to quietly keep an eye on any staff inmate interactions involving him, and perhaps remind staff that the penalties for taking bribes are career ending and freedom ending. Prison time for the staff too. In short, officers face a dual challenge: charismatic manipulation on one hand, and potential financial temptation on the other. So meeting that challenge means strict adherence to policy, teamwork, and a healthy dose of skepticism towards any friendly overtures from the inmate. If they can manage that, they deny Diddy the leverage he's accustomed to wielding in the free world. So I want to stay on staff presence real quick. Presence. How would staff balance professionalism with the reality that everyone knows who he is and might treat him differently, even unintentionally? This is a real tightrope for the staff. The truth is, everyone will know exactly who Sean Combs is. It's not a nobody. You can slip into the system incognito. On day one, officers, counselors, even cafeteria workers will be keenly aware that P. Diddy just arrived. Acknowledging that reality without bowing to it is the challenge. The danger comes in two forms: favoritism and overcompensation. Let's start with favoritism. It's human nature to be a bit starstruck or at least curious about a famous person. An officer might linger at his bunk to chat about music or give him a slightly bigger serving at chow or overlook a minor infraction like an untucked shirt, things they might not do for a regular inmate. The officer might rationalize, well, he's different, doesn't pose the same problems as other inmates, or even feel that showing a little kindness to a celebrity is harmless. But other inmates will notice immediately. Inmates have a PhD level ability to detect uneven treatment. If Combs is seen as getting breaks, it breeds resentment. Well, why does he get to stay in the rec yard longer than us and can actually make him a target? If the staff won't discipline him, maybe we need to check him. Favoritism, even well-intentioned, erodes the staff's authority and the inmate's safety. Now, the flip side, overcompensation. Some officers might go out of their way to prove they're not starstruck. They'll be extra rigid or harsh with him. They might write him up for the tiniest rule violation or given very curt, cold replies to any question he asks just to demonstrate they're immune to his fame. This can backfire too. If he's being treated more severely because he's famous, that's also unfair and can cause issues. It could lead to complaints or even legal action if it's blatant. For example, if he's the only one getting cell searched every day with no justification, that could start looking like harassment. The solution is something drilled into every correctional officer's training: impartial professionalism. The motto is often firm, fair, and consistent. With Combs, staff have to constantly check themselves against that standard. Practically, it means if they wouldn't allow inmate Jones in bunk 23 to do something, they don't allow Combs in bunk 24 to do it either. And conversely, if they would quietly help Jones with something permissible, say letting him sit out of a let him sit out of an optional recreation because he's not feeling well, they should extend the same courtesy to Combs, not deny it just to make a point. Supervisors at Fort Dix will likely brief the staff ahead of time. It's common when a high-profile inmate comes in for leadership to remind everyone he is to be treated no better and no worse than any other inmate. They might monitor interactions a bit more closely at first. For instance, the warden or captain could randomly observe how officers talk to him or review any incident reports involving him to ensure there's no bias. If any staff member seems to be getting too cozy, asking for autographs, chatting about celebrity gossip, or on the other hand, appears to be badgering him, that staff member could be reassigned for the good of the order. And there's also peer accountability. Corrections is paramilitary in structure. Officers will call each other out if someone is out of line. If one guard is always seen laughing it up with Combs, other officers will say, hey, knock it off. You're making us look bad and setting a bad precedence. The same for an officer who's riding him too hard. Colleagues might intervene if it looks personal. In summary, the staff have to consciously ignore the hype and stick to the institution rules and protocols. In prison, rules are the great equalizer. Combs can be a multi-platinum artist on the outside, but inside Fort Dix, the rule book doesn't care about record sales. The more the staff can focus on the rules instead of the person, the more smoothly this will go. Professionalism in this context means checking any personal reaction at the door. Neither fanboy nor disciplinary beyond what policy dictates. It's not always easy, but it's absolutely necessary to maintain order and credibility. Now, some people have been asking about protective custody. So protective custody at Fort Dix. So if asked for PC, how would Fort Dix handle that given its layout and population? So protective custody, PC, is essentially what an inmate is when an inmate is separated from the general population for their own safety. At a place like Fort Dix, PC is not straightforward because the facility is not designed with a dedicated protective custody unit. Fort Dix is almost entirely dormitory housing for general population inmates. So if Combs generally feared for his life and requested PC, the prison's immediate and only option would be to place him in administrative segregation in the SHU, which is a special housing unit we talked about. And in other words, solitary confinement under protective status. What would that mean for him? It's basically jail within a jail. He'd be in single or double bunk cell, locked down about 23 hours a day. Meals come through a slot in the door. Recreation, if offered, would be alone in a cage or small fenced area for an hour a day, if that. No mingling with other inmates. No attending programs like RDAP or going to the chow hall or gym. His interactions would be limited to staff and possibly a few other segregated inmates, and then that would be to just shouting through the door. It's a very restrictive life, arguably far more stressful day to day than being in the relative freedom of general population, even if general pop has its social risk. Fort Dix can handle that on a temporary basis. They do have a SHU. Every federal prison does. Even camps send inmates to the FCI SHU when needed for short-term segregation. If there was a specific threat, say he was being extorted or someone tried to assault him, they could yank him out of the dorm and stick him in the SHU under protective custody status while they investigate or until things cool down. That's essentially an administrative measure. We're putting you here for your safety while we figure out what to do. But long-term protective custody at Fort Dix would be problematic. For one, he'd be losing out on all the programming that was the reason to send him to Fort Dix in the first place. He can't do RDAP in a SHU cell. The program is group-based and requires interaction in classes, so being a PC would likely nullify his chance at that sentence reduction, which his lawyers and the judge wanted for him. If Combs felt he needed PC for more than a brief stint, the Bureau of Prisons would probably have to consider moving him to another facility. In the federal system, some higher security prisons or special units can accommodate inmates who can't be in general population at all. For example, there are certain medium or high security prisons that have larger protective custody units or that can isolate a celebrity more humanely. A transfer to one of those might occur if Fort Dix proves too risky. The irony is that a transfer for PC might put him in a higher security environment, because that's where PC units often exist, which could expose him to a more dangerous population in general. Though he'd be separated from them, it's not an ideal outcome for anyone. The likely scenario is that Fort Dix would try everything else first to avoid PC. That means closely monitoring his interactions to prevent issues, possibly quietly moving any inmate who poses a credible threat, transferring them out or to the SHU, and advising Combs on how to navigate without ruffling feathers. They might even use informal methods like having respected inmates or mentors guide him to reduce any friction. And if he himself doesn't want PC, and many inmates, even high-profile ones, do not want isolation and stigma that comes with requesting PC, then it's a moot point unless a serious threat arises. One illustrative case, Martin Shigarelli, the farmer bro who was at Fort Dix, wasn't in PC, but he did end up in solitary confinement after allegedly misusing a contraband cell phone. That shows that the only way to truly isolate someone at Fort Dix is the SHU. If Diddy had to be separated, he'd go to the very same SHU cells that Shigarelli and others have experienced. There's no special protective wing, and SHU's life is grim and very limited. So if he were to ask for PC, initially they accommodate by putting him in a SHU administrative detention status for protection, but both he and the prison would view that as short-term fix. Long-term, either he'd have to tough it out in general population with extra safeguards perhaps, or the BOP would relocate him. Fort Dix's layout and mission just aren't conducive to keeping someone in PC for an extended period. It's a last resort tool there, not a sustainable living arrangement. All right, question 6 of 10. How does a facility deal with the extra media scrutiny that comes with housing a celebrity? All right, the moment Sean Combs becomes an inmate, he doesn't stop being a public figure. The media will be intensely curious about everything, what facility he's in, what he's doing each day, what troubles or successes he has in prison. Fort Dix officials know that. Eyes are on them in a way that isn't true for the average inmate. Guys, you can see this with just the media. They post up every little thing. What toothpaste is he using? What's he eating for lunch? Practically, the prison administration will coordinate closely with the BOP's Public Affairs Office. Any media inquiries about Combs, and there will be many, are typically directed to the Public Information Office, that's the PIO, who gives carefully crafted responses. For example, if reporters ask, how is Combs adjusting to prison? The official response might be boilerplate. Inmate Combs is designated to FCI Fort Dix and is enrolled in appropriate programming. For privacy and security reasons, we do not comment on specific inmate daily routines, and they'll keep it very generic. Staff on the grounds are generally instructed not to talk to the press at all. If a journalist somehow calls the prison or shows up at the gate, officers will refer them to the PIO. This tight control prevents off-the-cuff remarks that could become headlines. Guys, recently you saw that with Kohlberger. Remember, there was an official drop of a video of him, and that officer has been removed from the job. They didn't put it down as being criminal, but they've been removed. Now, inside the prison, this scrutiny translates to caution in every action. Officers will document interactions with Combs diligently, say he complains of not feeling well. Medical staff and officers might preemptively record what was done. So inmate Combs was seen at sick call, evaluated, vital signs taken, no acute issues found. Very similar to what we do with every other inmate. In cases it later becomes a story. Let's say Diddy says prison denied him medical care. They did documentation, they did the report, and they're covered. No different than what we do with other inmates. So this is within our area of expertise. It's all about liability. Essentially, they create a paper trail for everything involving him. It's a form of CYA, cover your own ass, knowing that any incident could be examined by outsiders. The administration will also likely limit his direct access to media. In federal prison, inmates can be interviewed by media under certain conditions, but these have to be approved. Given his high profile, the BOP might deny most media interview requests or only allow a very controlled few. The BOP's own guidelines allow institutions to manage multiple media requests by, for instance, limiting the number of interviews or grouping reporters into a press pool if interest is overwhelming. Don't be surprised if Combs has very few or no interviews during this term. The Bureau doesn't want the distraction or the inequality of one inmate getting tons of press time. And that's fair. Plus, he's going to be programming. So that takes up your time as well. The staff also have to be mindful of what Combs himself communicates to the outside. Every phone call he makes will be monitored, except legal calls, and recordings reviewed. Every email he sends on the monitored query link system can be screened. If he says something controversial on the phone, that recording could leak or be subpoenaed and turned into a media item. For example, if he called someone and complained, "This place is a nightmare, the guards are racist," that could explode in the news. So the prison might quietly remind him through his counselors about the rules of monitored communication, hoping to dissuade him from saying anything that could cause a stir. Of course, he has a right to talk, but if it causes disruption, they might react by tightening his privileges, especially if it's unfounded. It's just doing what they do, just complain because they can. And usually the complaints are very general in nature. From the public pressure side, if any allegation of mistreatment arises, expect the Bureau to respond more quickly than usual. High-profile inmates can trigger visits from prison inspectors or inquiries from higher-ups if something seems off. As a result, the local staff will be extra careful to follow policy with him. They don't want a legitimate complaint. For instance, if he files a grievance about something, you can bet it won't be ignored at the desk level. It will get attention from the warden's office to make sure it's handled by the books. One more angle. Sometimes other inmates try to use a celebrity's presence to their advantage with the media. Perhaps someone in his unit might contact a family member who then tells a reporter, "Oh, my husband says Diddy gets special treatment," or "Diddy is having a hard time." The prison can't control what other inmates say, but they're aware of the rumor mill. If a story breaks that originated from an inmate gossip, staff will likely investigate to squash false rumors internally or address any true issues quickly. All told, the facility deals with media scrutiny by opening in a very by the regulations way. I like the wording of that. They stick to routine, treat him as normally as possible, and keep communications tight. The mantra will be, do nothing different, but be prepared to justify everything. So do nothing different, but be prepared to justify everything. It's a bit of a spotlight effect. Day-to-day procedures won't change. Count, searches, etc. all happen as usual, but there's an acute awareness that any misstep could be tomorrow's news. As long as the prison runs a clear operations with him, they actually have an opportunity to show the public, see, justice is being done fairly. They just have to ensure there are no obvious blunders or favoritism that would undercut that message. So sometimes the exposure is good for us because we could show the stuff that we do, and hopefully it gets put out there in the proper light. Hopefully, but the way the media works, that's not always the case. Okay, so that brings us to routine versus reality. So day to day, would P. Diddy's life look any different from a regular inmate at Fort Dix? Okay, so on paper, his day-to-day life will be virtually identical to that of any other inmate. Federal prisons run on strict schedules, and Fort Dix is no exception. There's wake up around 6 a.m. for morning count. then breakfast in the chow hall. He'll stand in line with the tray like everyone else. He'll have a work assignment or a programming to attend on weekdays. In his case, likely the RDAP program for a significant part of the day, which is essentially like a full-time therapeutic class schedule. There are set times for lunch and dinner. There are multiple mandatory head counts each day where he has to be in his bunk area for roll call, typically early morning, 4 p.m., and again late at night, plus the overnight counts. Recreation time is offered at certain hours, and he can go to yard or gym then, or alongside hundreds of others. At night, there's lights out, and he's expected to be on his bunk by a certain hour. In all these respects, nothing in the timetable or rules book carves out an exception for celebrity inmates. He'll wear the same prison-issued khaki or green uniform. He has the same housing quarter style at Fort Dix. That means a bunk in a dormitory room. Perhaps he might get a lower bunk if he's older or has a medical slip for it, but plenty of inmates have that. He'll have that same access to commissary snack shop once a week on his designated day, limited by his inmate number rotation. He's allowed the same $360 monthly spending cap and the same list of items as others, no more. He can make monitor phone calls, but with the same 15-minute per call limit and 300 minutes per month limit, though BOP raised it to 500 minutes during COVID. Not sure currently, but either way, it's capped for all. And he can send emails, but only through the prison system, and buy songs for his MP3 player like others, etc. In short, the formal structure of his life is the great equalizer. Now, the reality or experience within that routine will feel different for him, mostly because of the attention and notoriety that shadow him, especially early on. For example, when he's standing in line at mealtime, other inmates will be sneaking glances or whispering. The food will be the same bland fare. Maybe he'll get scrambled eggs and oatmeal on a Friday like everyone else, but a lot of the guys at the table will be keenly observing, did he actually eat in that stuff? Did he say anything? In the first weeks, everywhere he goes, he'll have a bit of a spectacle aura around him. If he gets a prison job, which he likely will have to, if not immediately, then after RDAP, prisons assign jobs to almost everyone. It could be something mundane like mopping floors, working in the kitchen, or orderly work in the education department. Imagine the optics, a world-famous mogul wiping down tables or serving chicken patties on the line. It's humbling, and it will draw interest initially. Yo, I got P. Diddy slinging mashed potatoes on my tray. But after a while, inmates and staff alike will acclimate to it. Humans normalize situations surprisingly fast. Give it a month or two, and seeing Sean Combs push a broom might not even turn heads anymore. One area of slight difference might be supervision intensity. Officers may do their rounds a bit more frequently in his dorm just to ensure everything's okay, especially at the start. They might be quicker to intervene if there's a crowd around his bunk or if they see someone arguing with him, whereas with regular inmates, they might not notice or bother unless it escalates. This isn't formal policy, but just an instinct when you know one inmate could become a news story. So he might feel like he's a bit under a microscope. That said, the officers won't coddle him. They'll also write him up just as quickly if he breaks a rule, precisely because they don't want to be seen as given leeway. Psychologically, the routine is going to be a shock to his system. This is a man used to a life of extreme luxury and autonomy. Now he has zero privacy, open dorm, communal bathrooms, zero personal freedom, told when to eat, sleep, work, and none of the comforts he's accustomed to. That's the same adjustment any inmate faces, but the contrast is far greater for him. A regular inmate might miss home cooking. Diddy will miss private chefs and five-star meals. A regular inmate misses driving. Diddy misses private jets and chauffeured cars. But over time, the human body and mind adjust to new normal. He'll fall into a cadence of count, chow, program, count, rec, count, and it will start to feel normal in a sense. So in summary, the schedule and requirements of each day will look no different for him than any other Fort Dix prisoner. The difference is in how he experiences it and how others initially react to him. Over months, even that will blur as he becomes just another inmate. Combs to the people around him. The Bureau of Prisons is very effective at institutionalizing people, meaning making them conform to the routine. That's what I mean by institutionalize. Diddy's challenge will be to adjust to that routine, but the routine itself certainly won't adjust to Diddy. So now you got the financial resources with commissary limits and inmate account rules. How do facilities prevent wealthy inmates from creating influence inside? So federal prison is sometimes jokingly called the great equalizer of wealth, because no matter how much money you have or on the outside, inside you're living on a very limited financial diet. The BOP has put multiple safeguards in place specifically to prevent rich inmates from having undue advantages or power. And let's break down the main one. So commissary spending cap. So I looked it up. Every inmate commissary purchases are capped at $360 per month. That's the upper limit, whether you're a millionaire or penniless. The commissary is basically the prison convenience store where inmates can buy extra food, toiletries, sneakers, etc. The list of items and prices is the same for everyone, and you can only buy up to that dollar amount in total. So even if Diddy got millions in his bank, he can't walk into commissary and walk out with truckloads of goods. At most, he can spend $360 a month, which in prison terms gets you some stamps, soap, ramen noodles, coffee, perhaps a radio or MP3 player. Those cost around $40 to $100, etc., but it's not an extravagant amount. And that $360 limit is rigorously enforced by the commissary computer system. Once you hit it, it won't let you buy more until the next month's cycle. And that's because, guys, you also have limited amount in supply. So if you got someone buying everything out right away, then it won't be enough for the rest of the population. And that's why that rotation matters too. You can't always go first. You know, once they get the new supply in, you have to rotate the order so everybody gets a fair chance, kind of like first come, first serve. No direct transfer of payment to others. Inmates are not allowed to directly transfer funds to each other's accounts. All money that comes in for an inmate has to come from an approved outside source, usually people on their visitor list or VIA legitimate payment services. So Diddy can't just start distributing money inside by, say, putting $100 on 5 different inmate accounts. If he tried to have one of his assistants outside send money to other inmates, that could trigger alarms if discovered. The BOP monitors unusual deposit patterns. For instance, if suddenly a bunch of inmates from Fort Dix all have money orders coming from the same third-party person or address linked to Combs, the SIS, that's the Special Investigative Services, will pick up on that quickly. It happened before where wealthy inmates or gang leaders tried to finance others and get caught because the money trail was obvious. And then I want to talk about monitoring of communication and contacts. So another angle is preventing a rich inmate from using outside influence. For example, he's not allowed to have his personal assistants or employees directly contact other inmates' families to provide favors. If something like that were going on, say inmate X boasts that Diddy's friend on the outside paid his wife's rent, an investigation would ensue. All phone calls are monitored and emails can be monitored, so coordinating such schemes is risky. The prison intelligence officer pays special attention to high-profile inmate interactions for exactly this reason. They want to nip in the bud any attempt to build a little empire through cash. That's why we got to get those cell phones too. You can't have the inmates talking in unmonitored conversations. Punishment for circumvention. If, despite these safeguards, he did attempt to use his wealth to manipulate things, the punishments are severe and swift. Imagine he tries to bribe an officer to bring in a cell phone, or he arranges through a proxy to put money in another inmate's account in exchange for protection. The moment that's uncovered, he's looking at a world of trouble. At a minimum, he loses privileges. No commissary for him for a long while, possibly no phone or email, and lots of time in the shoe. In a worst-case scenario, offering a bribe or running a financial scheme in prison can be referred for new criminal charges. For example, bribery of a federal official, which carries additional prison time. It's happened in the past. Inmates and outsiders have been prosecuted for racketeering or bribery related to prison schemes. In practice, what does this mean for day-to-day influence? It means Diddy can't buy immunity or buy loyalty in any official sense. He's living under the same rationing as everyone else. Now, can he still leverage money in subtle, informal ways? Possibly, to a limited extent. For example, he might use his commissary purchases to be generous with friends. Many inmates create a little circle where they share items, like making group meals by pooling commissary food. If he got funds, he might always be the guy springing for extra ramen or tuna packs for a prison potluck, which could make some inmates like having him around. He might also pay another inmate in commissary items to do his laundry or clean his bunk area. These kind of under-the-table arrangements happen frequently in prison. But these things happen on a small barter scale and aren't unique to wealthy inmates. Anyone with a few dollars can do it. So staff keep an eye out for any inmate appearing to live beyond their means inside. Again, that's their means inside. If suddenly Diddy has an entourage of inmates carrying his stuff and he's showering them with commissary items every week, staff will interview those inmates to ensure it's not extortion. Are you doing this of your own free will? And often in prison, when a rich inmate arrives, there's a caution. Sometimes others try to extort them. Pay us or else. Staff will be equally alert that he isn't being forced to spend his money on others. They'll likely check in discreetly to ensure he's not receiving threats like, you better buy us all commissary. Finally, consider outside money influence. Diddy has businesses and possibly could try to keep them running from inside. BOP rules strictly forbid an inmate from conducting business while incarcerated. He's allowed to talk to his financial managers or lawyers, but he can't be on daily phone calls directing a company. Someone like him will have people on the outside handling his affairs, so it's less of an issue. But if he attempted to run any side hustles or investments from prison, that would be shut down and possibly result in discipline, as happened with the farmer boy when he was accused of using a contraband phone to run his business. Sadly, the only when you don't monitor the legal calls, sometimes that becomes a way of doing illegal business. In summary, the prison rules level the playing field. Money in his commissary account can buy chips and soap, not power. Any influence he has will have to come from his personality and reputation, not from splashing cash around. And the institution is vigilant about that and has both systemic checks and personnel in place, like the investigative division, to enforce it. The goal is that inside those fences, he's just inmate Combs, not a multimillionaire mogul. And for the most part, that's exactly how it will be. Okay, last two questions. So number 9, even in low security, gang influence exists. Would gangs try to recruit or tax a celebrity inmate? Gangs are present in almost every federal prison to some extent, even low-level securities like Fort Dix. So they have their gang members among the population. The question is how much influence they exert in a low-security setting and how they view a celebrity like Diddy. Fort Dix is known to have a lower level of inmate politics compared to higher security institutions. In penitentiaries, nearly every inmate is forced to align with a group, often based on race or gang affiliation. Those groups control a lot of the prison economy and enforcement of unwritten rules. In a low, it's more relaxed. Many inmates can walk unaffiliated without major issues, and while gangs exist, they don't run the place outright. Violence, as mentioned earlier, is relatively infrequent and tends to happen within certain circles, so gang beefs, personal disputes, etc., rather than as a constant threat to everyone. Given that environment, it's unlikely that gangs would immediately try to tax Diddy in the classic sense, i.e. extort him for money or commerce or in exchange for protection. In higher security, a new high-profile inmate might indeed get approached by a gang leader with an offer of protection for a fee or a demand that they pay rent to be left alone. At Fort Dix, doing something like that would attract a lot of attention from staff and could land the extortionist in serious trouble and onto a bus to a penitentiary. The gangs at Fort Dix know not to kill the golden goose, so to speak. They don't want the institution coming down hard due to high-profile incidences. Moreover, Diddy's profile actually deters some extortion. He's not just any rich inmate. He's internationally famous. If a gang tried to harm or extort him, they must assume that news would leave the prison walls quickly, bringing heat from outside, media, possibly even FBI if there were threats involved. It's much easier for gangs to prey on unknown inmates whose plight won't make headlines. As one officer might put it, nobody wants to be the idiot who made the evening news for stabbing P. Diddy. It would bring an unwelcome spotlight and crackdown. Would gangs try to recruit him? That's also doubtful in the traditional sense. He's not going to join a prison gang. He has his own identity and crew in the outside world, and he's older. Gangs usually recruit younger guys looking for belongings. What gang would he even join? He's African American, so one might think the black gangs like Bloods, Crips, DC Blacks, etc. might approach, but Diddy isn't exactly gang material and has no history with those groups. If anything, they might show respect and leave him alone, or at most have a casual, friendly rapport if individuals happen to get along with him. The bigger concern from staff would likely be the reverse influence. Diddy unintentionally forming a following. He could, without trying, become the center of a little crew. Maybe a few inmates who are big fans start hanging around him, then add a few who are older and in recovery if he's in RDAP with them, who bond with him over group therapy. And before you know it, there's a small group that eats together, works out together, etc. Not a gang, but a clique centered on him. Now, if that clique starts having run-ins with others, say someone disrespects Diddy and his new buddies back him up, you have the seeds of conflict. Staff will be observing if he gathers a crowd or if any one group seems to claim him. Interestingly, he might also draw the protection of favor of certain gangs without formalizing it. For example, members of a particular gang might independently decide, we like this guy, he's cool, we won't let anyone mess with him, even if he's not paying them. This can happen if a high-profile inmate carries himself well and earns informal respect. It's possible some influential inmates might essentially tell others, hands off him, simply because they think it's in everyone's interest to avoid drama. This wouldn't be out of altruism per se, more like protecting the status quo. From the gang's perspective, another factor, Diddy isn't an enemy to anyone. He's not coming in with baggage like being a former cop, which would be a big problem, or a known snitch or something that inherently makes him a target. He's there for a vice-type crime, according to reports, some kind of Mann Act conviction. And that doesn't pit him against any gang agenda. He's not rival to anyone inside, so there's no built-in incentive for gang members to harm him. Of course, nothing in prison is guaranteed. Always got to put that caveat in. If some gang members is young and stupid and thinks extorting Diddy could make him a legend, he might try to strong-arm him for money or favors. And if that happens, I suspect Diddy would immediately involve his lawyers, as I mentioned above, and immediately involve his lawyers. Would immediately involve his lawyers, and the BOP would react decisively. They likely remove the perpetrator, as I mentioned, ship them out or throw them in a shoe, and potentially put Diddy in protective custody until they ensure he's safe. As we discussed, that's not a long-term solution, so more likely they remove the threat. Because of this status, any hint of extortion or threat will be treated very seriously. So in summary, the formal gangs at Fort Dix probably won't target him for taxes in the way one might see at a penitentiary. The environment and his profile discourage that. The onus will be on staff to monitor more subtle shifts in influence, making sure he isn't inadvertently creating a power block or that no one is quietly trying to suck him into their orbit. The facility will want to avoid a scenario where, say, a particular gang starts acting like his de facto security detail, even if voluntarily, because that too undermines institutional control. They'll want him to just float, not to become a piece in the gang chess game. And given the type of inmate he is, that is most likely what will happen. He'll float between groups, friendly with many, but tied to none. All right, last question. When a celebrity serves time at a low-security prison, does that sentence still carry weight with the public and with the inmates population itself? So this cuts to the heart of perception versus reality. A lot of the public hears low-security federal prison and thinks of the old trope, club-fed, tennis courts, easy living, almost like a white-collar retreat. There's also a narrative that celebrities get off easy by going to camps or lows instead of real prison. Inmates, on the other hand, often have a hierarchy of respect that puts penitentiary time at the top. That's hard time. And camp time at the bottom. That's soft time. So where does that leave a celebrity like Diddy doing a 4-year bit at Fort Dix, which is a low? Firstly, let's address the public perception. Some segment of the public will indeed sneer that he's at a low security facility instead he's being coddled. But most reasonable people also understand that any prison is a serious punishment, especially for someone used to extreme freedom and luxury. Fort Dix is not a summer camp. It's an overcrowded and has had its share of issues. In fact, insiders have described it as one of the most chaotic and mismanaged federal prisons despite its low security status. I saw that as well. One former inmate pointedly said that if you want, hold on, let me just fix this. I lost it. Where is it? One former inmate pointedly said that if you want contraband and lax enforcement, Fort Dix is great. But if you want to do your time and not be bothered with nonsense, this is the worst prison. I take a penitentiary rather than this place. That's a perspective the public wouldn't know. That a low security can in some ways be more frustrating due to things like theft, because it's dorms, overcrowding, or disorganization. So if Combs serves at Fort Dix, those in the know understand he's still in a tough environment, just one with less violence perhaps, but plenty of other hardships, boredom, lack of privacy, possible petty bullies or thieves, etc. For the public image of Combs post-release, that's all going to depend on how he and his PR team spin it. Some celebs come out of prison and try to downplay it. Others embrace it as a redemption narrative. Given his conviction in this scenario related to a prostitution Mann Act case, which is a serious crime but not a gangland or violent crime, he might not lean into any hardened by prison image because that doesn't align with who he is. More likely, he'll focus on rehabilitation, lessons learned, etc., which is what we see now. We see that now, especially with that recent article from TMZ about how he misses his kids. The public will not think, oh, he only went to low, so it doesn't count. The guy disappeared from the scene for multiple years. That speaks for itself. 4 years in any prison will get attached to his name in the media with a sort of notoriety. I mean, headlines will forever mention that he did prison time, and comedians might even joke about it. Did he went to summer camp prison? But the fact remains that he was locked up. Now, within the inmate community and those who have done time, you're right that the person that asked this question, you're right that there's a bit of machismo about higher security time. Some might say he wouldn't have survived the USP or tried doing that time in the pen than talk. But I don't actually think Diddy cares about impressing any hardcore felons with how tough his prison was. He's street cred in the traditional sense isn't what's on the line. It's not a gangster rapper trying to earn stripes. He's already had street cred from the 90s hip-hop world, and this crime isn't boosting that. If anything, it's unrelated. So again, among inmates, he might get some ribbing like, man, you had it easy at Fort Dix. But also remember, a lot of inmates at low and camps have done time at higher levels or know those who have, and they themselves prefer being at a low because it's less dangerous. They're not going to fault him for not being in a gladiator pit. It's not like he chose his security level. It was determined by his charges and lack of criminal history. So in terms of accountability and the weight of the sentence, the important thing is he's serving time in a federal prison, period. The system is holding a rich, famous man accountable just like it would others, arguably not just like others, since he had top lawyers and probably got a lighter sentence than a non-famous person might for same conduct. But from the point of conviction onward, he's being treated as an inmate. That does carry weight as a statement. It shows that at least at that level, fame didn't buy him out of prison time entirely. And for other inmates, what matters is how he does his time. If he comes in acting entitled, snitching, or unable to handle the daily grind, then he'll lose respect. If he does his 4 years quietly, follows the convict code, doesn't inform, keeps his word, minds his business, and maybe helps some guy out along the way, he'll likely gain respect among those he's interacted with. Those inmates will go back into their communities and might say, actually, Diddy was solid in prison. He wasn't on no celebrity bullshit. That kind of word can help his reputation in certain circles. In contrast, if he spent the whole time winning or whining or in PC, the word would be he couldn't hang. Even if being in PC might have been prudent, it still carries stigma. It appears he's aiming to do programs and better himself. That's the RDAP program, etc., which is looked at positively by many inmates, especially in a low. It's like he's doing his time constructively. And that's important. So importantly, Fort Dix will assure, as much as any prison can, that he doesn't receive special treatment. That means his experience, though at a low, will be one of accountability. He'll have to stand for count. He'll be punished if he breaks rules. He'll be living in a warehouse-style room with dozens of men, using an open bathroom, eating mediocre food, and separated from everything he loves in the free world. That is punishment to some extent, definitely accountability. It might not be for supermax lockdown 23 hours a day punishment, but it's punishment that most people would find quite harsh if they experienced it. When he comes out, the public may not grasp the nuances of low versus medium versus high, but they will know he went to prison and paid a debt. And given his high profile, media will likely cover any missteps inside if he got in trouble, or positive notes if he mentored inmates or did something good. Those details will color the narrative of how serious his time was. So in the end, a 4-year federal sentence is significant. It's not a slap on the wrist. He'll miss 4 years of his kids' lives, 4 years of career opportunities, endure 4 New York, New Jersey winners. New Jersey winners. I meant to say New Jersey. I don't know why I put New York there. He'll endure 4 New Jersey winners behind fences. For inmates, time is time. Everyone counts the days regardless of the facility security level. So yes, the sentence carries weight. Maybe not he survived Pelican Bay weight, but it's nothing he or others will dismiss. If anything, the fact that he went to a low means he wasn't involved in violence or prior serious crimes, which is a good thing for his character if he cares about that. To sum it up, within prison circles, people might joke that he did easy time, but they'll also note he did time. And for the public, the low security aspect might not even register strongly. What they'll remember is Diddy went to prison for a few years. The integrity of the punishment is maintained by treating him like every other inmate at Fort Dix. And by all accounts, Fort Dix will do just that. No special meals, no deluxe cells, which gives the sentence some level of legitimacy. It shows the system didn't give him a free pass. He was held accountable under the same prison regime as thousands of others. In that sense, the time he serves will speak for itself. And don't forget, guys, once he serves the time in prison, he's still got time he's got to serve once he gets released, right? Doesn't he have probation? Let me check on that. All right, so Sean P. Diddy Combs was convicted in July of 2025 on 2 federal counts of transporting people for prostitution under the Mann Act while being acquitted of sex trafficking and racketeering. On October 3rd, 2025, he was sentenced to 50 months, 4 years, 2 months behind bars, fined $500,000, and will face 5 years of supervised release once his prison term ends. Because he has already served time in custody 13 months before sentencing, that time will be credited towards his 50-month sentence. Once he completes his prison stint, and we'll talk about, we already talked about that, about how the calculation will work, including if he gets the RDAP program and completes it. Diddy will move into a supervised release phase, essentially probation on steroids, for 5 years. During that time, he'll be bound by strict conditions, no new crimes, no drug possession, regular check-ins with a probation officer, travel and residence restrictions, and likely special conditions tied to the nature of his conviction. For example, bans on explicit sexual content, restrictions on contact with minors, mandatory counseling or treatment, and possibly search conditions. Federal law mandates supervised releases for felony sentences, and courts often impose extra terms tailored for the offense. If he violates any of those conditions, especially serious ones like new criminal offenses or drug use, he could be sent back to prison. The court will decide how much time depending on how serious the violation is and the original offense class. In short, Diddy's road won't end when he leaves prison. For 5 years, he'll be under very close supervision, walking a tightrope. One wrong move can land him right back in the cell. And let's hope if that happens, that's what gets done. As always, guys, I wanted to give this information. Hopefully I answered all your questions. I worked on this for the last couple of days. Stay safe and more videos to come.